Hello, my name is Stephen Van Butte. I'm a member of the Canadian XLH network. My daughter is a spontaneous case. That's how I fit in here. I'm really excited today to have a chance to talk with Jen Jones. Jen is a retired lawyer and a USA Today bestselling author of the Cozy Mysteries. In her spare time, Jen likes to quilt, she likes to grow garlic, and she advocates for patients with rare disorders. Hi, Jen.
Hi,
Welcome.
thank you. And I'm a spontaneous case too, so
Yes,
um,
I saw that too. You're a
yeah,
spontaneous case.
yeah,
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about your XLH journey?
sure. Of course, you can tell I'm ancient here, so it was actually even worse when I was diagnosed than when your child was. Although unfortunately, it hasn't gotten that much better. So yeah, so I started in the days where they treated you with just massive doses of vitamin D. They said, well, it looks like rickets, so we'll treat it like rickets, right?
Yeah.
And if you won't deal with normal amounts of vitamin D, we'll just give you more to see what that does. And if it doesn't kill you, it'll help, right?
And
So I
how
went
long
through.
would they do that before they go, oh, this is not working?
Oh no, they just kept doing
They
it.
just kept on doing it. Oh, wow.
Yeah, because apparently we do have some ability to deal with stuff. So there may be some compensating mechanisms in our system, so we don't just like outright die, right? and
That's
and
a good thing.
Yeah, it is. And in fact, we don't just die from what is actually an overdose of vitamin D, which other people would do, but we basically flush it. So it's not as harmful to us as it is to the normal population. So no,
Mhm.
they just keep doing that. And then when you're 16, they said, okay, you're done. Have a good life. Um, and then I later on they started giving me calcium, which of course didn't do anything and was horrible.
Yeah.
Um, and then eventually they figured out, oh yeah, it's phosphorus. So I went on phosphorus and calcitriol for a little while, but it A didn't do any good because I was in my 40s by then.
You had stopped
And
growing. Yeah.
yeah, well, I stopped growing and it just doesn't work for adults. It just
Mhm.
doesn't. They can tell you it does, and a few people get some marginal benefit from it, but fundamentally it just doesn't work. So I stopped, and I had all the side effects too, so I stopped doing that. And then fortunately burosumab came along, so that actually did do me some good. So
Yeah. Tell me a bit about that clinical trial.
oh, that was just fabulous. I mean, I can't say enough good things about clinical trials in general. It's not the only research study I've been in. I've been in a bunch of them now. It's the only one that was for a FDA process.
Yeah.
But the principal investigators are just so committed. And especially, I think, in the rare disease world, where they're not getting fame and money out
Hmm.
of this. They're doing this because they really, really believe in it. So,
Yeah.
they treat you so well. And at least that's always been my experience.
And my daughter Alice was in a
Same thing.
clinical trial, yeah, with Yale, and I
Yeah.
absolutely the same thing. Great
And it's
treatment,
like,
wonderful people.
and they're so concerned about, they talk to you. It's like the first time I did a trial there, it wasn't the burosumab one. It was a different one for pure science, which they did. It was something they didn't think was going to work, but they needed to know that it wasn't going to work
Hmm.
for sure
Yeah.
rather than pursue it. And, so I was totally new to clinical trials. I walked in, I figured, oh, this principal investigator, he's world famous. He's going to have 3 seconds for me, and then he's going to be out the door, right? He spent like an hour and a half with me doing this extensive physical, asking me, all the history and everything. It's like, I have never spent that much time with a single doctor in a single visit. I was just amazed, and that was consistent with the rest of my experience in clinical trials. That they just care so much. It's not anything like you might expect it to be,
Hmm.
in a good sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And what and when brought you around to advocacy of um, well, not I mentioned rare disorders. I don't know if it's just XLH or if there are other disorders that you advocate for, but where did that When did that come in?
Well, it's mostly advocacy for XLH, but I like to try to look at the bigger picture and point out where advocating for the rare community in general can also benefit the XLH community, and vice versa.
Yep.
The things that we do can also benefit the broader community. But I got involved in XLH advocacy mostly as a coping tool. It's like there's nothing you could. I was in my 40s. I was falling apart physically. I had pain all over. Nobody understood. Nobody knew it was related to my XLH. I was still going on the advice that go have a normal life. You're never going to have any more problems. You're just going to be short, right? And I was like, there's got to be more out there. So I started doing the research, found the XLH network, and then realized the benefits of community. And at that point, there really wasn't a lot we could do except for support each other emotionally. Sort of, I've been there, or what the doctor's telling you is wrong. Go look at this, and be careful about that because you're taking, for example, a bazillion phosphorus tablets with no calcitriol, and that's going to damage you. So I got really active on the listserv and answering people's questions, which meant that I had to go research stuff. So it was a way of kind of getting out of my situation and helping other people. So I wasn't so focused on, oh, this is unfair, and oh, I hurt all over, So it's a distraction basically. And then I joined the XLH network board and I did some stuff there.
Had you met other XLH patients before you connected with the network?
No, that's the thing about being a spontaneous, and your daughter's had a better experience than I had with that. I was, oh gosh, when did I start? 2016, 2015. I was in my 50s, I think, before I met another XLH patient, and I met somebody at Yale while doing a different trial there.
Wow.
But yeah, that was the first time.
It's an amazing thing, and it's so comforting. Both when I went to, or our family went to the XLH Day in the States, to find a community like that, and I know that's something we're really trying to or hoping to build here in Canada because it's so important. It really is.
It really is. It really is. I mean, there's a lot you can do through advocacy, and the only thing that I would caution you about is to set your sights higher. I mean, that's a really, really important step that advocacy groups need to do, is to introduce each other, to help each other not feel alone. But when I started advocacy, I thought that was all we could do. I didn't see all the amazing things that advocacy groups are doing today, like doing their own research, right? Millions of dollars worth of research, going to Capitol Hill and yelling at legislatures, in a nice way. but I also think that there's a place for a not so nice way, that we've been nice for decades.
Yes.
That within clear limits, it's important to also show a little bit of anger sometimes, that we aren't being heard. But it wasn't until I went to a Nord Summit event that I realized just the huge possibilities there are today. I really think that anybody that does want to get into patient advocacy should go to either the Nord Summit, the one in DC, not the one primarily for patients, but the one for advocates, should go to that, or go to the Global Genes event in California, depending on, which is more convenient. They have slightly different perspectives, and going to both would be even better. But going to one and just seeing the amazing things that other organizations are doing, other advocates are doing, I think helps to lay out the landscape better, so that when you're setting goals, the goals are bigger than you might think of otherwise. So like I say, getting us together and and helping us with some of the social aspects of it is fabulous. But just be careful not to limit the scope to that.
Yeah, I know. Sherry, my wife, recently went to Cord, which is the Canadian
Yep, this
organization
Canadian
where she,
version of NORD. Yeah, yeah,
and it was in Ottawa last week.
yeah.
And same thing. She
Oh
noticed
yeah, I
definitely
saw
all the
some of that.
different. Yeah,
She came back with her mind blown, right?
yeah,
You know,
all
I
the
mean, I'm
different
hippie from
agencies
the
that are doing
'60s.
different things.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, the science that's happening right now, advocacy that's happening right now.
Yeah.
You know, and some of the history too, that a lot of patient advocacy came out of the AIDS era, where patients just said, no, you know, we're not going to get treated like this, right? We're gonna start taking more control of what's going on. And I find that fascinating too. But just the entire scope of what different patient advocates are doing is just amazing out there. And I think until you've been exposed to that, it's easy to set limits on yourself that you wouldn't have otherwise.
Mm-hmm. You've recently written an article, "Whole Body, Whole Life, Whole Family: Patient's Perspective on X-linked Hypophosphatemia." Can you
Mouthful.
talk about can you talk a little bit about that?
It wasn't just me, though, I got to say.
No, that's right. That's true.
I don't want to take full credit for it.
We will provide the link below when we do publish this. So yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, we only have a temporary link right now. There'll be a more permanent one later. But yeah, no, the liaison at Ultragenics for patient advocacy put together a team of patients, plus some representatives from Ultragenics for the science part, plus a doctor for the science part, and a professional medical writer. And basically, the professional medical writer took what we, the patients, said were the issues, and prettied it up a little bit for us, and turned it first into a poster for the ASBMR, the American Society for Bone and Mineral Research conference last year. And then it turned out that the timing was really good because I don't know if you know this, but most medical journals won't accept a patient-written article unless the patient has a PhD or an MD after their name.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so a lot of times you'll see patient perspective articles in these medical peer-reviewed journals. They're actually written by a doctor. So it's what lawyers would call hearsay evidence, right? Because it's not the doctor's experience, it's the doctor's interpretation of what the patient is telling them.
Right.
And, I don't know if you've experienced it, but patients filter what they say to their doctors a little bit,
Absolutely. I read that a lot in the article where they mentioned pain, especially would tone down just how much pain they're experiencing.
Yeah. I mean, you probably experience it with your daughter. It's like you ask her how she is, and she may be having an okay day, but she's probably not 100% pain-free. But she won't mention that, right? Because she's having a good day, and it's not on the top of her mind.
That's right. Well, and you mentioned somewhere too where I can't remember if it was this article or another, but someone who didn't know how much pain they were in, or that this was not normal, not what people other people experience, until they were medicated and the pain went away. So it's
That's
amazing.
huge. That's huge. I have heard that. I heard that first years ago from one of the speakers that spoke at the symposium on hypophosphatemia. But I had heard him say that a couple of years earlier than that, because I'd met him through the clinical trials. And it really resonated with me. And looking back to my childhood, the two things, the pain and fatigue, I just thought were normal.
Yeah.
So I mostly didn't pay attention to them. And it wasn't until those started to go away that I realized that I'd been living with that for so long, right? It's like, it was about a year and a half after I started Burosumab. I'm driving down the road, and if you've ever driven in Massachusetts in this early spring before they filled the potholes, you know that, you take your life in your hands to drive down the roads, right? So I'm driving down the road, and I usually try to avoid the potholes, but for some reason I just smack dab right in the middle of a pothole, right? And before I started the trial, if I did that, my spine would spasm so badly that I would be paralyzed for about a second,
Oh my gosh.
right? Yeah, the pain would be so severe that, how like if you fall and you have the breath knocked out of you,
Hmm.
it was that kind of a paralysis, right?
Wow.
So I go and I hit this thing, and I'm at this pothole, and I'm like, that didn't hurt. I'm like, oh my gosh, that didn't hurt. So I drive down the road and I find another pothole. I go straight for it, right? Hit it on purpose. Go through it. Didn't hurt. I'm like, oh my gosh. And I hadn't even noticed that those spasms had gone away
Hmm.
because I had taken them so for granted before that.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that that's very true for a lot of the patients that were in the clinical trials, that they underreported how much they improved because they just didn't notice it.
Yeah.
That it just it just was normal to them.
Hmm.
So anyway, so I got you detoured there. I don't remember where we were,
It's
but
okay.
we were
I was,
talking about the article, I think,
yeah,
and
I like
what a
the
great
idea.
team it was.
Yeah, it it approaches like whole body, whole life, whole family. I think that's a great perspective because
Yeah,
it's not just you, or it's not just the patient who
yeah,
has to go through things.
yeah,
And I think that it's important, whether it's caregivers or like it affects your whole life.
yep.
That was really impactful for me.
Well, that's good. Yeah, I'm hoping that phrase will be adopted by more patient advocates. And quick shout out to Elizabeth O'Lear and I get the name wrong. I think it's Marion Hart at Indianapolis, who were the first to really start using that phrase.
Okay.
And it really clicked with us, and we were hoping that we could expand on it a little bit. So,
Mhm.
because that's the key to it, that even with kids, the clinicians understand, oh yes, this is a serious condition for kids, but they don't see the full picture. They're focused on, are those legs straight?
Mhm.
Are are the rickets at the softness at the end of the bones, is that getting better? But they're not seeing the kids who are like unable to sleep at night because their muscles hurt,
Yeah.
or can't can't do after school activities because they're just so chronically tired,
Hmm.
which burosumab does help with,
Yeah.
um, or at least we think it helps with. And the old supplements didn't. So
Yeah.
so even with the kids, where they acknowledge that this is an important condition that needs treatment desperately, they're still not seeing the full treatment picture. So it makes me a little frustrated when there seems to be a trend toward, oh, we'll just start them off with the old treatment, which doesn't work.
Hmm.
um, and if their bones don't get straight, then we'll put them on burosumab. And I'm like, no, 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 you're like not seeing the whole picture there, right?
Hmm.
And so that's why it's important to remind clinicians that it's not just those straight bones. It's not, just the rickets at the end of the bones. It's the whole thing, the whole body,
Yeah.
and then of course the whole life and whole family. But
Yeah, and that was one thing I really thought was very interesting. Like I know our Canada's Agency for Drug and Health Technology, CADTH, are the ones who kind of have reviewed some of the
mm,
research
yep.
and have made a recommendation uh, for Canada and for the provinces, and it does stop at they've decided that
And
there's
this is
not.
on payment. This is not on technically who it can help. This is just who they'll pay for.
Correct. Yes.
Right.
Is the yeah, and they stop at after you start growing. If you
Yeah.
or I think if you start on Durosumab, you can have it uh, for a given amount of time.
Right.
But if you're at a certain age, they have made the conclusion that there's not enough research right now to say that it's effective on adults.
And
But
that's just baloney.
yeah, reading the article, there's so much,
they're
the
basically
pain and everything. Sorry,
they're
go ahead.
basically saying we're not suffering enough,
Yes, exactly.
right? They're saying that our pain and suffering is not worth the admittedly high cost of this treatment.
Yes.
And I think it's extremely short-sighted. The one area where we don't have enough evidence yet, but I'm firmly convinced will come, is that burosumab works preventatively.
Mm-hmm.
So we know this is a progressive disorder. We know that if you take kids off treatment at age 20, let's say, that by 30, they're going to be in serious pain. At 40, they're going to have calcifications throughout their body and be as limited in motion as I am.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just goes downhill from there, right? We know that.
Yeah.
The thing is, it's slow. It's like erosion, except in the other direction, right? It just,
Yes.
it adds slowly. But that's the problem, because especially again, we're used to pain. We don't notice it. We're used to restriction and mobility. We don't notice them. So when they just get this little tiny bit worse each year, we don't notice it. But
Yeah.
all of a sudden, you hit this point where you can't do something, or the pain is just, you can't ignore it. But by then, the damage has been done.
Yeah.
Right. So what we need to do is start the treatment before that problem keeps getting worse, right?
Mm-hmm.
And ideally prevent it, keep it at a plateau.
Mm-hmm.
It takes time, though. So, burosumab has only been approved for 4 years. I can't do math. It's really only been consistently used in anyone for about 6 years, right?
Yeah.
And I think that they want like 10 to 15 years before
Yeah.
we can really say that this slow accretion really has stopped.
Yes.
Okay. So I understand that, but I firmly believe that evidence is coming, that it will be shown to be preventative.
Mm-hmm.
But by the time that happens, 15 years will have elapsed for people when
Yes.
they're not on the treatment. And that's what breaks my heart. It just, we have slightly different issues here in the States, where the FDA doesn't say who will pay for it. It just says whether it's safe and effective.
Mm-hmm.
And then each individual insurance company decides whether they'll pay for it, right?
Yes.
So it's challenging that way too. But yeah, it's very frustrating to see that, and I think France has done the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they're still deciding in Europe, in England. So it's possible that more adults will be out there suffering. And like I say, the bottom line is their decision isn't that it's not effective. They
Right.
know it's effective, right? That's absolutely no question about that. They're just saying you're not suffering enough for the cost. That's all they're saying. And that just breaks my heart. And not just, and this is where advocacy for XLH patients and advocacy for rare disorders in general overlaps, because we're going to see that argument more and more and more as gene therapy comes along,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you got to figure that gene therapy is going to cost like $1 million.
Yes.
Right? I
Yeah.
mean, it just is. It's going to be, one event. It might take 6 months for that event to happen, but it's going to be basically one event, right? That will presumably cost in excess of $1 million.
Yeah, no doubt.
So where do you draw the line in terms of whether patients are suffering enough to pay that $1 million?
Yeah.
And I think the XLH community is clearly on the suffering enough side of it, right?
Yes, I would agree with you from what I see.
If it's to fix a hangnail or something, then maybe not, right? But I think that's a hard decision to make. But I think that as advocates, we need to be out there, and this is where the getting a little angry part comes in, saying, you're saying we're not suffering enough to be worth helping, right? Just admit that that's what you're doing, because that's what it is, right? It's not that it's not effective. It's not that it's not safe. It's that you don't think we're suffering enough.
Yeah. Another thing that the article mentions is the kind of coordination of the different healthcare providers. I know that's something that we're just starting, I think, to look at in Canada. When my daughter was at Sick Kids,
Hmm.
um, we saw a lot of that. We would spend one day at the hospital and we'd see the
Yep,
endocrinologist and the nephrologist and the orthopedic surgeon.
that's
Um,
fabulous.
now that she's starting to transition to adults, yeah, it's
Yeah,
much more chaotic. What's
yeah.
your experience? And
They'd never heard of transition when I was a kid, right? Because remember, I'm 18. I'm about to go off to college. I'm never going to see my pediatrician ever again because he's a pediatrician, and I'm 18, and
mhm.
I'm cured because
Yeah,
apparently you don't need phosphorus when your bones are have grown. Um, so I was just like kicked out. You're done. Go away.
hmm
Have a good life. And the sad thing is that's still happening today. Obviously not among the clinicians who are well informed and well intended. Although even in those cases, you run into the problem that there's nobody to refer the patient to.
yes,
Okay, and I don't know if you're seeing that too, but um, you, you know. Dr. Rupi in Texas, you would have heard her speak at the XLH Day in Texas. Absolutely wonderful woman. Sadly passed shortly after that,
oh,
um, and and she was, I believe, she was primarily a pediatric endocrinologist, but she had nobody to send her adult patients to.
yeah,
So she ended up treating adults with XLH as well. She made an exception
hmm
for that in her practice because there's nobody in the entire state of Texas that she could refer them to.
yeah,
And so that's a huge problem. I know when I was on the board, there was an issue of, where there were trying to find endocrinologists that would treat adults
hmm
in Florida, just as an example, right? There are 3 or 4 different places who have pediatric endocrinologists who have experience with kids in Florida, right?
hmm
No one, zero, who treat adults
wow,
in the entire state of Florida, where you got to figure the adult patients outnumber the pediatric
yeah,
ones,
you
right?
think so? Yes,
Just given the demographics there.
yes,
So that was just very disheartening. And one of the things that I noticed is I went to the endocrine conference one year on behalf of the network, and we had a little booth, and I was bored, so I was like dragging people in from the aisle saying, come talk to us, right? Um, and they would take one look at the name of our organization and say, oh, I don't treat kids, right? So
wow,
I don't need to know anything. And they would
mm
go off, and it's like, no, 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 it's not
no,
just for kids,
hmm
right? I was saying that needed to be our motto. It's not just for kids anymore, right?
yeah,
But one of the, I mean, this isn't why Burosamab is good, but one of the benefits to Burosamab is that it's a lot easier for an endocrinologist who understands the basics but hasn't seen like 500 patients
yeah,
to be able to feel, I think, fairly confident that they can treat a patient with XLH.
yeah,
Because it's not like, I mean, your daughter started on the FOS supplement, so it's like 57 doses a day, and you
yeah,
adjust it every 3 months, and
yep,
more tests, and if you get it wrong, you ruin the kidneys,
hmm
right? And the
yeah,
parathyroids. So there's a real downside to getting it wrong if you even if you're trying really hard,
hmm
and there's no real good I mean, there's guidance, but the
yes,
guidance boils down to try this and see what happens,
yeah,
right? And I mean, even somebody like Dr. Carpenter, I think, would say that it's like, well, we try this, and then we check the labs a few
yeah,
weeks later,
yep,
and adjust from there. And so somebody who hasn't seen a lot of patients is going to be, understandably, and I think rightly, reluctant to take on something like that,
yes,
feeling that they don't know what they're doing, right? Burosumab is basically, I mean, I'm exaggerating here because that's what I do, but it's basically one size fits all.
hmm
You give them a dose based on their weight.
hmm
When they gain enough weight, you change the dose,
hmm
right? And you do a few tests in between to make sure that they're not one of the rare people that needs an adjustment to the dose. But that's
yeah,
it, right?
hmm
And there's virtually no risk of ruining the kidneys, virtually no risk of doing anything to the parathyroids. I mean, there's always a risk, right?
Yep.
But nothing like with the FOS supplements, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I can see that as endocrinologists who would be terrified of the malpractice implications
Yes.
of doing the FOS and calcitriol routine, being willing to at least try something that's relatively simple.
Yeah.
And so, and even more so at the adult level, where you're not going to ruin the entirety of our life if we get the wrong dose for 6 months, right? With
Right.
kids, that could be an issue because they're peak growing times. But with adults, just the risk reward ratio is a little bit different there. So we need to get more clinicians to understand that they can do that. Well, first of all, that it's needed, right?
Yeah.
That adults need treatment. It's not just for kids anymore.
Yes.
Whole life. It's needed. And there are lots and lots of resources out there for how to do the treatment. And it's relatively simple.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that complicated trial and error. So that's some of the education that we still need to get out there to bring in more endocrinologists to be willing to treat adults, which then in turn makes it easier for the pediatric endocrinologists to get onto the transition bandwagon.
Right.
Right.
No, that's some great, advocacy pieces I hadn't thought of. That's really interesting.
Oh yeah, you kick over one leaf and or one bucket, and there's 47 more buckets underneath it to deal with. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit, changing gears a little bit. Tell me a little bit about weak bones, strong wills.
Oh, that's my little pet project. That was one of my major projects from the network.
We got a copy. I know our family did at one of the XLH days, and yeah, it's a collection of really fascinating and well, eye-opening for us. I know because we were pretty new to it at that time. So tell me about how that came together.
It's almost kind of an XLH day in a book, right? Where again, I mentioned that with journal articles, you get patient perspectives that come mediated through a doctor. So if you go on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, wherever your retailer is, and look for books about what it's like to be a patient with X, right? Not XLH, but with any specific disorder, right? At least the last time I did it before the book came out, all of them were written by doctors. Okay. And all of them were written by doctors who didn't have the condition. Okay. And there's a need for that. There's definitely a need for that, but it's not the full story because they didn't live it. Right. And as a writer myself, as a storyteller myself, I thought it was important to get the unfiltered patient perspective out there. And I also thought it was important to gather the stories about what it was like before burosumab, before
great point. Yeah.
Because God willing, in another 20 years, kids will either be on burosumab or something like that, or on gene therapy, and will grow up totally normal, right? They won't have bowed legs. They won't deal with bullying. They won't be short or shorter than they would be based on the rest of the family's genetics. They won't have pain. They won't be unable to pursue careers that they would have chosen, and so on and so forth. And there would be, and it also gets back to that we're not suffering enough to be worth the cost, because we'll forget what happens to patients if they're not on that treatment.
Yes.
Right? So we need to document what it was like to have grown up with, like me, essentially no treatment, right? And I had a mild case as a kid, right? So that was part of it too, was just to document the history and to get it unfiltered before what I think was just like a world-changing event for the XLH community with the approval of burosumab because of the potential for growing up normal without any of these challenges. So that was what inspired me. And I knew that my experience was different from everybody else's experience. And so I wanted to get as many different stories as I could, and also across the whole range of, spontaneous, inherited, childhood was bad, childhood was mild, and then the various age groups. So yeah, and the stories that we got were just fabulous, right?
Yeah, they are really. And the fact that you got that spectrum, because we found that out too, is that the disease hits people differently.
It does.
And yeah, it's truly amazing. It's great to get that perspective, because
and it's good to get validation too. It's like there are differences, and there are also consistencies. You might have symptom, or your daughter might have symptom A and not B, or might have experience A and not B. And it's both good to hear that other people have had experience A, as well as to hear that, some have different experiences, right?
Yes.
And, at least I was spared that, or, whatever. So I think it's important to see the full range of the experiences, definitely.
No, that's great.
And so I'd like to say, when it came out, it was the only book out there that was directly from the patient experience. So I'm pretty proud of that. So
that is a huge thing. I say, with everything that comes from doctors, like you say, kind of hearsay, or
it's losing the term. It's a third-party source, second-party source. If you're a historian, it's secondary sources. If you're a historian, somebody living in the era writing about something is primary. But if you're reading somebody who's reading the primary source, then it becomes secondary. So yeah, the doctors are all secondary sources. We're primary sources.
Right.
And that's kind of been one of the motivating issues. Actually, since going to the NORD event, one of the big things that I've been interested in is the disconnect between the medical community saying, patients are the real experts, right? They know their lived experience better than anyone else. We've got to listen to patients, right? And they've been trained to say this, right?
Yeah.
But as soon as push comes to shove, and it's hard to listen to patients because the patients are saying something that's a little inconsistent with what the medical community believes, they don't listen, right? Yeah. Then all of a sudden patients don't know anything. And I saw that at the FDA. I see that in institutional review boards not including patients on their boards. And I see that in peer-reviewed journals not including patients on the peer review panels. So when it comes to walking the walk, they don't walk it. And so that's one of the things that motivates me in my advocacy. It's like, if you're going to say that we're the experts, then you got to listen to us, right?
And how do you advocate for that? How do you?
I call them out.
Oh, fair enough.
Right?
Yep.
Something. Yeah, it's I don't travel much anymore. It's just too difficult, and then of course the pandemic. But on social media or in journal articles, my big thing is stop calling XLH rickets. It's not.
Yes.
Okay, and it's the whole body, whole life, whole family thing, right? Rickets is a pediatric bone symptom, right? And as long as you call it rickets, there will be clinicians out there that say adults don't need treatment.
Yes.
And as long as you call it rickets, you will discount the fatigue and muscle issues of kids, right? So whenever I can, and usually as politely as I can, when I see rickets used incorrectly, I will point it out. And I will, I'll just say, please don't use the term rickets. Yep. It's inaccurate and it's harmful to patients, right? And sometimes they listen and sometimes they don't. But, I figure if we say it often enough, it might get through, right? So, I would have loved to have actually included that in the article, but that might have been a little too blunt.
I know when we first kind of started meeting and getting the Canadian XLH network together, uh, a lot of the folks, a lot of the patients who we were meeting with, um, did still call it rickets themselves
Yeah.
because their professional, their medical professionals were doing that. So
Yep.
it was
Yeah,
very
it's
interesting
habit.
to
It's
see
what they
that.
were. It was that what they were taught. I totally understand that, but I think once they become aware of what rickets actually means and the
Hmm.
connotation, I mean, I'm a word person, right, as a writer, so I words matter to me.
Yes.
um, and they matter in the real world too, because it gets back to the endo society and the adult endos saying, oh, I don't treat kids because it's rickets,
Yeah.
right? And you just got to break that habit, and it's hard, you
Yeah.
know.
Any kind of final words on advocacy? Anything we missed that you'd like to mention?
I think that's everything. The biggest thing is just really, really encourage anybody who wants to get engaged to start following Nord and Global Genes, and attending one of their conferences if at all possible. Or if not, check out some of their webinars. They're absolutely fabulous, just to see all the potential that's out there. It's such an exciting time for science right now. This is something that I've been I was terrible at science as a kid. I mean, it was like, it's boring. I don't care about it, right? um, but we're really at a fascinating point in science, I think, where, and I've lived through like sort of the evolution, and this goes along with the treatment too. That when I was a kid, they were saying they looked at you from the outside and said, "This looks like rickets, so we'll call it rickets," right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then later on, they realized, oh, actually, it's got something to do with vitamin D. Oh, no, that was where the old vitamin D name came from. And then eventually in the 1980s, they figured out, oh, it's actually phosphorus. And they didn't change the name, which is a problem. But
Mm.
at least they knew it was phosphorus. So they're looking at your blood. So they're inside you at least, right?
Yes.
But they didn't know the next step, which was why the blood was messed up, right? So it wasn't until 2000 when Dr. Econs and some other teams discovered FGF23. They're
Hmm.
down to like the molecules now, right? It's not
Yeah.
even the blood; it's your genes, right?
Yeah.
So they're getting like deeper and deeper and tinier into the body, right? And the next step is going to be figuring out why it is that this problem in your gene then causes the overexpression of the FGF23, right?
Yeah.
um, and then once and then work from there, because then they can get even before your kidneys, they can get even like further to your bones to treat, right? So we know so much now that they didn't know when I was a kid. But
Hmm.
there's still all these great questions out there. So I find that fascinating. It's not like some time it's not like Star Trek Future where they've got all the answers, right? It's all in this little recorder that they can just push the buttons and you're healed now, right? Which I think would make medicine really boring, right?
You would, you think? Yes.
Yeah, but we're past the leeches,
Yeah.
right? And we're past looking at just sort of like, well, that kind of looks like maybe we should throw some vitamin D at it, right?
Hmm.
To really actually understanding, kind of the body's logic for these things, and but we don't have all the answers yet. I just think it's a fascinating time for science, and that there are a lot of there's a lot of work for advocates to do too, to make sure that we're included in the science. That I don't know if you've heard it, but it's a great line. Nothing about us without us. So
No, I like that.
isn't that great? Yeah, it's a
Mhm.
good it's not used as much as it should be on social media, but I like it. If you're going to be studying us, you're going to be offering treatments for us. Nothing about us without us. So make sure we're involved all along the process. So I think that's an important one. So anyway, excitement about where we are with science, and a commitment to holding the medical community to including us are,
Mhm.
are the two big things that keep me going today.
That's great.
And
Thank
I'm getting up there, so we need to pass the torch, guys. Let's get some more people engaged in this.
Yeah, and that's where both the XLH network and the Canadian XLH network, and there's even the XLH Alliance now. So
There's some
it's
fabulous work
really coming
happening out
global.
there. Yeah, no, I'm so impressed. The XLH Alliance event. I don't know if you're going to it in Dublin next month.
I'm not, but
Looks to
I
be,
do know folks who are.
yeah, that looks to be just fabulous. The agenda is amazing. The work that they've put into that is amazing. The all the different countries that are starting from scratch in terms of patient advocacy, just like Canada. My hat's off to them. It's just amazing the work that they're doing. So, and they can all use more volunteers. So,
Absolutely. All of
yeah,
us could use
yeah.
more volunteers for
Oh, yeah.
sure.
Tell me about it. Yeah.
Uh,
So I wish you all well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll list. There's um, Weak Bones, Strong
Strong wills.
Strong Wills.
Yep.
Weak Bones, Strong Wills. We'll have a link below, as well as to the two articles: the Whole Body, Whole Life, Whole Family, and the Voice of the Patient report that you had.
Yep.
So,
From the XLH symposium. Yep.
yeah, that's great. So thank you very much, and I really appreciate your time today.
Well, thank you. And if anybody has any questions, they can reach me at ginjones.com, and always happy to answer.
We can put that link down there as well. Awesome.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much, Jen. Have a great day.
Great chatting with you.